Well, today's the day. The mask comes off. Hi, my name's Doug. I am the main admin for this page, Separation of Corporation and State. At this point, I wanted to speak directly because I felt that none of the other factions or groups that we see online or that we see in the media are clearly articulating what I felt was important to emphasize. We have a bought-out system, and that system is desperately trying to maintain its control. If you follow the money, you'll see that major corporations and very wealthy billionaires are able to effectively run political campaigns for politicians who then, when they're in office, implement the policies that they were paid to implement. Now, many Americans think that our system is trying and failing. Oh, they're trying to take care of the people, but it's just not working. They're just incompetent. No, the system is working exactly as it's intended, and that is to basically take as much money as they can from the people, not implement anything to help, and only help those who donate to their campaigns. While they don't necessarily are trying to kill us or anything, they don't care if we die if they can make money on it. But in any case, this poison of the political process being able to be bought out, and the people not having a say, that is what has led to things like the U.S. being at war for decades, over 20 different countries, or maybe even more than that, millions of people dead. And it's just been, normalized. I mean, think about it like this. There's children, or they're not children anymore, but there's people alive today that are, 20 years old, that they've never actually seen a day where the United States was not at war in the Middle East. And this has an effect on the country. I remember the country used to feel a little bit different before 9/11. 9/11 was, I think it was an inside job. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But it makes sense that after 2 planes hit towers, that's when the American public was willing to go to war over there. Before that happened, you had the United States, you had citizens talking about cutting the military budget because the Cold War had just ended. And then Rumsfeld came out one day before 9/11 on September 10th and said that the Pentagon was missing $2.3 trillion that they couldn't account for. And so this just goes to show you this lack of accountability. My theory on why money goes missing, quote unquote, when it comes to the Pentagon, or where did the 2.3 trillion hole come from? I think it's because the money is all digital. So all you got to do is go into the bank accounts, the database of the bank account that has the defense contracts, and you just go 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, great. They've got 10 times more money than what's accounted for in the account now. It's just that easy. I mean, I do computer stuff, programming, database work, and if you worked at a bank and you had approval from higher up, it would actually be really a relatively simple process to go in there and just edit the amount of money that you have in a bank account. But no one would know if you don't tell anyone and you keep it secret. That's why the Fed doesn't want to be audited, because if you were to audit it, you would find similar holes where money was paid, but it was created out of nothing. It wasn't accounted for or anything like that. So the military defense contract companies are some of those companies out of the many. You got health insurance companies, you've got other kinds of companies that are buying out the government. But one of the biggest ones is the military industrial complex. So so people are wondering why these wars are taking so long. I mean, we have the most powerful military in the world. We spend 10 times more than any other country, pretty much. So why is it so hard for us to win in any of these conflicts? Well, my theory on it is that the point of it is not for us to win, but to keep the wars continuous. So whenever one faction starts to gain on any of the other factions, you do what you can to bring that faction back. As soon as another faction starts to win, you do what you can to hold them back. And then you keep it so that the conflict never ends. And the point of that tactic is to keep the gravy train flowing. So you could sell weapons to both sides. You could sell bigger weapons to both sides, and more expensive and profitable weapons to both sides, as the conflict continues to spiral out of control. And whatever. We've seen this in, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pretty much every country the U.S. has been turned into a profit-based, continuous war. And, now it's starting to come back home. I think you're going to start to see some of the same stuff you see in the Middle East with instability coming back to the United States. Basically, when the internet came out, it was kind of like Pandora's box, because the story that the media tries to tell people about what's going on. In the past, it was like you got your knowledge from the newspaper or like secondhand accounts. So that story was always able to be co-opted and controlled before it got to you. But now on the internet, what's happening is the story gets out first, and no one can control it, and everyone tries, and then you just end up getting a lot of bullshit. And the point of this propaganda, I guess, is to pit Americans against each other. You've got Antifa, you've got these neo-Nazis, you've got the alt-right, you've got all these groups. Everybody's just sectioning out into smaller and smaller groups, smaller and smaller factions, and none of these factions are going to work with another faction because they're so rigid. So basically, it ends up being where people are fighting each other, but the people who caused people to fight by pumping out these stories in the media are the ones that are in charge. And so in order for them to maintain their power, they have to divide us. Because if we're not divided and we're working together, even if we're from different perspectives, then we'll be able to stop them. But if we're all fighting each other over really small stuff, then we're going to basically scatter like cockroaches if any kind of like real crisis hits, which it's hitting right now. But I mean, like if the economy collapsed or something, would people come together and help each other out, or would they like say, I got mine, get away, I'm trying to protect my family? I don't know. I honestly don't know. We'll see if it happens. Again, I was going to say, if you look at any politician, that's part of the problem with our system is it's called a representative democracy, where we're supposed to have taxation, but with representation. And, this system, like, I get why we had it, because back in the 1700s, if you wanted to get a message to Washington, D.C., you'd have to ride weeks by horseback to get there. So you had to send someone in your place to kind of represent you. But now with the internet and modern computers and stuff and cell phones, it's feasible that every citizen can represent themselves. And we do. And that's why these politicians look a lot like they're always getting in the way, because they are. They're middlemen, in between what the people want and what they can get. And in the past, we didn't have the communication network that allowed for that real-time representation that we have now. But a lot of people think that maybe our country started out as a republic, but it's definitely an oligarchy now, because the people that we elected don't represent us, and that's why political parties are a problem too. Because I noticed that a lot of people are focusing on personalities. They're focusing on the personality of Clinton, the personality of Trump, the personality of all these politicians, and they're not focusing on policies, actions, things that they're doing. They're just going off of like feelings. Sometimes it seems like. And I think that if the people had to vote on the policies themselves directly, or if they could veto decisions made by politicians, then that would do a lot to help prevent the country from sliding further toward decline. You have an example of a country who's done this, Switzerland. Even the U.S. has some elements of it with initiatives. So if you get enough signatures on a petition, you can make an initiative and people can vote on it. That's just direct democracy right there. Now, whether that's the best type of system or not, I don't know. But that's what I think would be better than what we've got now. Part of this page is that this isn't about ego. This isn't about me trying to tell you that I'm ever so wise and you need to listen to me. This page is set up around debate, right? So whenever I've learned most of my life, it's been from people who disagreed with me or people that were debating back and forth, and we're just having a conversation, and then someone will bring up an interesting fact, and you'll go, "Oh, that's interesting. Did you think about this?" And it's like the dialectic, like the Greek dialectic, the back and forth conversation to come to some kind of understanding, rather than the type of education which is popular in the United States, which is the lecture style, like I'm going to drill it into you, this is how it is. But instead, so that's why I'm pretty clear about saying my own biases and why I think the way that I do, but I'm willing to debate anyone, and I want us to find, common ground and, have a better situation for our country in the future. I just don't want it to be worse in the future, because for me, I'm a progressive, so I basically want to see progress happen. I want the line to go up. Oh yeah, 10 years ago, it was worse than it is today. Okay, 10 years from now, it's going to be better than it is today. And when I say better, I don't mean just for me. I mean all people. So, you can look at that through various statistics. How's everyone's income doing? Does everyone have access to clean water? Does everyone have affordable health care? These are all things that, people need to get on with their life. And so that's why I tend to focus on those issues on this page. And some people feel like the U.S. is a free country. I don't actually think it is. I actually think it's a pretty authoritarian country, but it's also a very big country. So you could drive in a direction pretty far. You could drive for miles or walk for miles and never run into any authority, because it's a very big place. So in some sense, especially if you're in like rural areas, it might feel more free because no one's really coming out there. But if you look at some statistics, like the number of people locked up in prison, the U.S. takes the cake. Number one, we lock up the most people. Basically, if you look at the way that employment works here, there's a big push toward wages getting lower, or not raising the minimum wage. Now, I'm not saying raising the minimum wage is the silver bullet, but people have to know that you have to make enough to live on. I don't care if you're a burger flipper. I don't care if you're a low skilled job. If you're working 40 hours a week, you should still have enough money in your bank account to pay your bills and save up a little money, maybe like at least a few hundred a month or something. Like we used to do it in this country. We don't do it anymore. It's not like the skills. It doesnst matter whether you're low skilled or not. Some people aren't gonna become the next Einstein, right? So it doesn't matter. If people want the situation should be such that if you want to rise up and gain skills, it's easy to do that. If you want to just get by and make enough money to live on, and you do other things in your personal life, great. I don't know what the problem is. There's more than enough to go around, especially if we focus on sustainability. We can make sure that everything gets recycled after it's done being used. And that's the other thing that's going to happen too with automation, and also the environment in the future, is that our economic model will have to change, because the model we have right now is not sustainable. For example, cell phones and everything are built to be disposable. You're supposed to get a new cell phone every 2 years or whatever. Some people go longer. I definitely have my Note 3, which is multiple years old. But what I'm saying is these devices have precious metals in them. They're very expensive. Those metals don't grow on trees, right? So you have to dig them out of the ground. And if we made the devices last 10 years or 20 years, the profit margins would be lower. Yeah. But you would also be gathering, 10% of the supplies that you're gathering now to do the exact same thing. So we're running into a situation where we're going to run into conflicts of interest between companies making money and the environment being sustainable, or jobs being sustainable, because we're rapidly reaching a point where you just don't need as many jobs. Now, I think one way you could alleviate this too is you really, if you lowered the retirement age, you made it so that people could retire earlier, and you increased Social Security benefits. What this would do is that all the older people that are kind of forced to work right now would leave the job market because they wouldn't want to work if they didn't have to. They'd retire. And then what would happen from that is that a lot of jobs would be opened up for everyone else who wants to work, right? It's not about how many jobs you have total. It's about how many people do you have that want to work and how many jobs are available for them. So when you do the kind of policies we have now in the U.S., you create a situation where people are desperate to find jobs because you try to raise the retirement age. You try to keep people so they can't save up any money so that when they're old they can't retire, and then you end up eventually having grandpa competing with grandchild for the Walmart job, right? So it's basically how we set it up here. And then because we import, because we have free trade agreements where we import products from other countries where the wages are much lower and the safety standards are much lower, obviously it's going to be cheaper. I mean, it's cheaper because they're cutting corners, right? So for example, Europe tends to not cut many corners at all, ends up being the most expensive, but it's probably the safest. The U.S. kind of cuts some corners, so our products end up being medium priced, but not very reliable. And then, then you go to like China or something, and the wages are really low, and they just spew whatever into the atmosphere. They're changing. I'm sure that as the standard of living goes up in China, it gets more expensive there too. So they move on to even poorer countries after that. The companies do, But what I'm saying is I'm not against free trade, but I actually think that we need to trade with each other on an equal footing. So part of a trade agreement for me, if I was writing one, would be getting China up to, oh yeah, you do all the same safety standards, your wages are correct for your for that area, so that the standard of, because obviously a dollar isn't a dollar everywhere, so the cost of living might be lower in China because of other factors. But just getting it to the point where people's standard of living is high, and that should be the goal. And the countries of the world can work together to make that happen. Because this is another thing to consider too. People, when you talk about the immigration thing, people are like, we don't want no immigrants. We're scared. They're going to blow up our country. They're going to take over and reproduce. And people do that about like Muslims a lot. So for example, Syrian refugees, right? They're obviously going to different countries in the world, but the reason why that happened is because of our bullshit in the Middle East, where we hire mercenary groups and destabilize these countries. We saw it in South and Central America too. We prop up dictators, we destabilize their countries, and then when there's a refugee crisis later, like 10 years later, we act super shocked and surprised, and we have no idea where it's coming from. The same thing with Syria too. And what's funny with Syria is, as Russia has been helping Syria out, the situation there has been stabilizing, and the main Syrian government is regaining more of their own territory back. And what's happened as a result? 700,000 Syrian refugees that had left Syria over the last few years have moved home. Okay? So if you want to prevent immigrants in your country, the way that you do it is you make sure that the place where they would be coming from is a stable, secure place. Because think about what it would take for you to move away from your home, like where you'd have to leave the country. It'd have to be pretty bad, I think. And you know what I'm saying? And so they're no different. If someone from another part of the world, if suddenly your country became war torn and it wasn't safe, you'd leave, and anyone that said, please come here, you'd be like, okay, I just need to get out of this danger right now. And what I'm saying is, so if you don't actually destabilize these countries in the first place, you won't have much of a immigration flow. Or if you do, there'll be people that are well off immigrating rather than the people that are desperate. And so I'm not really, that's not issue number one for me. I'm just saying from when you look at all the issues we're facing right now, the issue that leads to all the other issues is money in politics. That money has been able to buy the process and dictate policies to us, even though those policies aren't good for us or anyone else in the world either. So it's only good for those who made the donations to get the policies that they paid for. Those are the only people that these policies help. So it touches so many areas. That's why Americans are disagreeing with each other, because they're letting us get divided. They're letting the elites, quote unquote elites, divide us. Because for example, you'll talk about something like regulation, like we need more regulation, we need less, and it's not really about more or less. It's about having the right regulations so that you get the best result. I would phrase it as little, as few as possible, as many as necessary to get the results you're looking for. So, for example, if you have a regulation that says that chemical companies can't dump their chemicals in the river, I'm for that regulation. I think that's a great regulation. If there's a different regulation that's like, oh, well, if you want to build a tiny home in your backyard, you're going to have to pay a fee, and it's going to be $15,000, even though your tiny home's $5,000. I wouldn't agree with that kind of regulation. So I'm just saying that it's not about more or less, it's about the correct ones. And because I keep going back to that original problem, because the system is completely co-opted and companies can buy the policies, the regulations don't make any sense for regular people. And that's why you have stuff like expensive fees to do a lot of stuff in terms of tax policy, because it keeps certain people out who maybe are the small business equivalent of that. And so it makes it so that only bigger companies can develop and afford to pay those fees and afford to lawyer up with all the legal bullshit that you have to deal with. Because there's basically a law for everything, and you're violating some law without even realizing it. And if someone really wants to go after you, they can. And if they have good lawyers, then they're likely to be more successful. So, but to that end, we welcome anybody on this page to debate us or discuss or come up with ideas or how maybe we could build a better future. I think the trick right now is to figure out a way to build a new system that renders our old system obsolete. I also think that when it comes to fighting back without being violent, I think the best way at this point is financial stuff where possible. So, if you've got like an unreasonable medical bill, don't pay it. If you can avoid paying a fee or a tax or whatever, and if you all did it at the same time, it would make a dent, and suddenly the system would change. So, for example, if the health insurance companies are charging you thousands per month to insure your family, and all of you and your friends and your family and your town just went like, no, we're not going to pay the bill anymore, then suddenly the health insurance company would be freaking out, and then it would be a disaster, and then you might actually get some kind of reform in the system because of that, because they'd actually be losing money. But you didn't have to do anything violent. You didn't have to hit anybody. It was just financial. So think about that too. That's a good way to resist, I guess. That's how, but in any case, beyond that, the main thing we need to do beyond any of the resisting part is to imagine, what would we replace the system with? Like what would work better? What would we want in our Constitution to be different? How would we want to handle voting? Would we have voting? Who would vote? How would it work? What would our economic system look like? How do we make sure that the result is good for everybody? This is a good question, because keep in mind, our system was made in the 1700s, the late 1700s, and it was built off of the Roman Republic model, right? So obviously there's a different way to do things, obviously in the 21st century we have a lot more available to us as far as tools we could use to build this new system. But I think the main place that the American people are at right now is we know that the system is not right, that it's got certain problems, and we discuss them all the time. But one thing I don't see a lot of is, what would you replace it with? What would you do instead? And so that's the purpose of this page, I guess, is we want people to focus on, okay, here's the problem, but what would we do different? And so, yeah, totally open to that. And this is just my first transmission. There will be more. We'll have other people on, and we'll have good discussions. But I just wanted to let you know that today's the day. Had to come out and say something. And yeah, so this is welcome to the page, and have a blast. Take it easy.